And who should be most concerned about telling the truth? But Christians, right? That if we believe in both small t truth and capital T truth, then we should want to tell the truth about the past. And then that opens up, I think, an even broader perspective on history.
Welcome to Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History.
Jonathan Den Hartog is professor and chair of the Department of History at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. He came to Samford in 2019 after having previously taught for over a decade at the University of Northwestern-St. Paul, Minnesota. He received his Ph.D. in American History from the University of Notre Dame in 2006. Dr. Den Hartog is a student of American history, in particular the American Revolution and the New Nation. He is the author of Patriotism and Piety, Federalist Politics and Religious Struggle in the New American Nation. Dr. Den Hartog is also a homeschool dad who has used Notgrass History curriculum in his family. Enjoy this conversation as we discuss learning and teaching history in your family. Welcome, everyone, for another interview with Notgrass History. I'm excited to be here with Dr. Jonathan Den Hartog, who is a history professor, an author, and also a homeschool dad. So he has a lot of interesting background and experience to help us as we think about teaching history to our children. So welcome, Dr. Den Hartog. Glad to have you with us.
Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Tell us just a little bit about your family and how you got into homeschooling.
Right. Well, so just on the family side of things, I'm married to Jackie, and Jackie gets most of the credit for the homeschooling in our household, but she does a great job with our four children. We have three girls and a boy, and they range from third grade all the way up to 11th grade. And we've been homeschooling with them for most of their careers. We're always open if there's a need to change something up in a year, but for the most part, we've been homeschooling. So my background with homeschooling, I actually was homeschooled myself a little bit. So I was on the receiving end. Many years ago, my parents were actually somewhat homeschool pioneers in the state of Iowa in the late 80s and early 90s, when there was a change in the law that moved homeschooling from kind of a gray legal area to clearly being permitted, and so they took advantage of that. And so I had some homeschool experiences in junior high and the first part of high school, and then I finished up at a local Christian school. So I got to see it in my own experience, and really thought, well, this would be a real blessing if we could do this with my family. And again, it's a wonderful gift to be married to a wife who's also really supportive of that. So we are homeschooling, as I said, now going on probably 11 years or so. And so then my role as dad is, when I come home, is definitely to do review and studying for any subjects people are needing some extra work on. And I get to talk about history with each of the kids, each of their different levels. So those are my roles in the homeschool endeavor. And one thing that brought us together for this interview is we are Notgrass History users. So as a historian, I do care a lot about the history that gets taught, the curriculum that we use. We've looked at a lot of things, but I'm really happy to say we've settled on using Notgrass. And just a couple of highlights. I just think the books are beautifully produced. They're just wonderful with the layout and with the illustrations, and even from the very young age, it brings students into them. We love the use of the primary sources. That's one thing I really hope to talk about today, that it really brings those in. And really the literary connections, I think, are great as well. And so just to illustrate this is my show and tell. Just a couple of books that we've used either this year or in the last couple of years. We have Our Star-Spangled Story, so shout out there. From Adam to Us, these were things that my kids were using earlier today. They said, no, you have to give it back to us, Dad. In their own words, I think I actually have an in their own words assignment for later today. And it was 2 years ago, we got to use American Voices. So these were all really outstanding Notgrass curriculum that we're really pleased to use.
Wonderful. Well, that's very encouraging to have your endorsement that it's been a blessing for your family. So thank you for sharing that. What sparked your interest in history? Did that start when you were a child, or how did that get started?
When I think about that, I really see two moments. And one was those years when we were being homeschooled. I can remember lying on my bed reading, which maybe says something about our activities, but lying on the bed reading a book, and it was a history book. It was a popular history book. I'm sure today we wouldn't say, "Oh, that was really academic" or anything, but it was a well done book that talked about the colonial period and the revolutionary period and the choices that people were making at that time. And it really struck me just a fascinating both comparison with what we have in a contrast, that there were some differences in the way people approached the world back then. And something like that really sharpened my interest. It sparked my imagination. The other moment was in college when I had just an outstanding professor who gave us a great class. I think it started as a class on science and religion, but he gave us a lot of recommendations about history and the history of Christians in America. And so I remember reading some of these books and having one of those aha moments that it was the history that helped me make sense of the world. It helped me make sense of who I was, and it helped me make sense of some of the experiences that I'd had already in my life. And so it was those two moments, I think, that really inspired this path to want to be a historian. And then to say, well, there's a real value in being in the university because it's a place to meet students, to interact with students, and to really shape people's thinking at a really critical point in their life. So I guess in that way, we're really committed to helping to train students at all levels.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, a lot of young people, as they're thinking about what kind of career they might want to pursue, sometimes they just don't know what's out there. So what is it like being a history professor, and how did you prepare for that? And just talk to us some about your experience and what that's like.
Right. Well, my first warning would be it's a very hard road. It's only gotten harder even since I went through the process. The changes in higher education mean that there's a lot of pressure, a lot of competition. So I really want to put that out there first of all. So I did an undergraduate major. I was actually a double major, history, political science. And lo and behold, my two areas of interest are politics and American history. So those two go really well together. And the strategy was just to work really hard, do really well. And then that became a springboard into a graduate program. I applied widely, but there was an opening at the University of Notre Dame, which proved to be really outstanding because the number one person I wanted to work with, a historian who's also a Christian, George Marsden, was teaching there. And so I got to study with him. And at the MA and Ph.D. level, you end up working very closely with one or just a few faculty members. And so they can be very influential in that shaping. Several more years of coursework, and then you take some very large exams. And then you have to write a PhD dissertation. And so this is meant to be a work of original history that no one has ever done before. And so you have to go looking for sources, again, that maybe no one has considered in this way before, and write them up and defend your argument. So that took a couple of years. I got to get on the road. I traveled all the way up and down the eastern seaboard, from Massachusetts all the way down to South Carolina, visiting different archives to look at papers from the Federalist Party, right? We don't often talk about the Federalists after the Federalist Papers, but as an active party, I think they were really important in the 1790s and early 1800s. So I was trying to understand them better and write about them. So the end result was a dissertation, defended that, and then it was a real blessing that I was able to start my first faculty job right after that. So the summer I defended, and then that fall I was in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And just talk about some of your experiences as a professor. Are there things that surprised you? For example, students come in and you expect them to know certain basic things about American history and they don't, or maybe they surprised you with things they did have, they had thought about, or they were, had some insights on. So just maybe you can share some anecdotes.
So I mean, on that front, I always say I look for the connections, right? So I don't assume much knowledge, but if they have something, I really want to build on it, right? You find the spark and you fan it into a flame. That would be my goal. No, I would. My two observations. One would be that learning is really exciting. That I love it when students do bring their best energy into the classroom, and then they start processing the material for themselves. And you can see the gears turning, and then as they make the learning their own, this is great because then you see people asking good questions, and we kind of build a positive momentum. So I would say that's my first observation. I would still say, after 15 years, learning is exciting. So that's one good reason to keep teaching. The other observation would just be that regional differences are still real in our country. So we started off, that first job was in Minnesota, was up in St. Paul, Minnesota, had a great 13 years there, but was largely teaching students from the upper Midwest. That was terrific. And then 4 years ago, the opportunity arose to come down here to Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. And students here are great, but they're different types of students. Some of their habits and mannerisms and expectations are different. And so as a teacher, it's my job to figure that out and figure out how best to connect with everyone. And so that would be maybe my other observation, is just teachers have to stay on their toes still, because we don't want to get stale. Sure.
Well, my father, Ray, who started writing our high school curriculum, one of his experiences in high school, he had a literature professor, a literature teacher, and a history teacher who coordinated their efforts so that the students were reading American history that was related to the time periods they were studying. And that was a meaningful experience for him. And that's something we've brought into our approach to helping homeschool families teach history. And my dad taught American history adjunct at Tennessee Tech University for a few semesters. Okay. One of the things, just one story I remember from that, he had his students read the novel The Giver, which we recommend in our Exploring America course. And one of his students said, "This is the first book that I've ever read all the way through." And so I appreciate what you said, whether, for example, if a family starts homeschooling after being in public school or private school for a while, or a child comes into college, wherever we are, we can start learning right there. We don't have to, worry about what we have or haven't done in the past. We can just start right where we are. And one of the things we try to do is a multidisciplinary approach to learning history by combining the lessons that help provide a framework, but also the primary sources that show students what people were actually thinking and saying in the past, and then the literature, some fiction, some nonfiction. So talk about just how all those things come together, whether in your family homeschooling or in your college, how we learn about history in different ways and combine those together.
Right. And I mean, just those 2 points I think are so important. I talked about reading as a homeschooled student myself. I think that sparking of the imagination, right? That one thing I'd want to communicate is history is not only the names and dates. You need some names and dates, and there are times, especially I think in the younger grades, where some names and dates memorization is a really good thing. But to go further, you really need that spark, and often that comes through historical fiction, and we should encourage that. Anything that gets people thinking about the past and wanting to learn more is really valuable. So I would just really encourage people to keep reading and to keep putting just good books in front of their students. The other point, though, just as a historian, is I so value those primary sources, that I tell my students, look, we're going to build our understanding kind of from the bottom up, with primary sources. That for a practicing historian, that's where you get to the understanding. And yes, we need to read other books, and we should, but our real study from the past comes from the primary sources that people left behind. And so that was a note I wanted to kind of share with people today, which is kind of some ways to think about primary sources, especially as they're, I would say, especially junior high and high school levels. But I might suggest a sequence that I might say is CCIA. And let me explain those letters. The first would be context, right? We can talk about the context of that source, right? What is going on at that same time as the document, right? What's the world it's a part of? What is the specific question or topic that the documents relate to? Now, because the documents are keyed to various sections in the textbook, that'd be a great time to make those connections. Maybe you cover the specific material in that section along with the source. Some of the documents have references to other things going on in the world that maybe we need to understand. And all of that context helps make sense of the primary source. Then you have content, right? What is the source itself saying, right? If we just look at it, what does it communicate? How does it fit together? What is an argument that it's making? What's going on within it? Context, content. I would be for interpretation. And interpretation is when we then ask more questions that we want to learn from the text, right? Does it raise questions that we could learn from in other ways? Or does it relate to another document, right? In their own words, just this week we were putting Christopher Columbus right next to Bartolome de las Casas, right? They're both part of Spanish colonization in the New World. So these two documents talk to each other. And then how can we make sense? So interpreting the document. And then finally, a question about application. And I think this is one other insight that the Notgrass books really do well with, because those Friday sections are tied to biblical lessons, right? Tied to Bible study, which means these things can help us understand how we might live in the present, right? It's not just a past thing, but it's a present question. And so how might these readings be relevant for our lives? Could something about this encourage us in the way that we live today? Could this encourage us in our faith? And as people read hymns or prayers from various eras, maybe this can inspire our prayer or help us to understand our faith in a different way. Or maybe there's a negative warning, right? Maybe there's something that, we can see this is not admirable and we should go the other way. So I think homeschooling provides a great opportunity to bring these conversations and these documents even into our life. How should we live as well? So CCIA is a great way to approach primary sources.
Yes, thank you for sharing that framework. If we just take a document, a lot of times we can't just pick up the document and immediately receive it. One, it may need to be translated from a different language, and we depend on other people to do that. Or it may, just because it was written in the past doesn't mean it's true. The author may be trying to raise their own reputation or diminish the reputation of other people. So we do have to bring critical thinking to understand it. So thank you for sharing that framework. It's very good. I know you have a special interest.
And just on that point,
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say on that point, right? Every author comes from their position, and we don't want to dismiss that. But part of the historian's question is where are they writing this from, right? What is their purpose for the document? Who is their audience for the document? What were they able to see? And if it's being recorded on site, there's probably saw a lot. But what were they not able to see? So those are all those interpretive questions that I think help us understand the documents better.
Right. Very good. I know you have a specific interest in the intersection of religion and politics in early American history, and you've written a book about that. So I want to share some of those insights. And as we look back at that time and think about the time we're in now, we see, we have a lot of rancorous debate and personal attacks, and, the media of the time back then, newspapers, people really got at each other and attacked each other and said a lot of nasty things about each other. So just what can we learn from that time period, and how do you think about that in the context of what's going on today?
Right. Just on that point about media, yes, when people say there's never been this dirty campaigning, it's like, well, a historical perspective actually shows us there have been dirty campaigns basically all the way back to at least 1800s. So we've got a 200-year history of dirty campaigning. Lessons and reflections. How much time do we have? I could go on, but everyone has places I know they need to get to. Let me make 3 points, just sketch them out that I think are relevant and the ways that our kind of revolutionary founding era can help us think about things. The first was kind of one of the questions that motivated me as I got into history is how do we think about Christians in the founding period, and therefore maybe the place of Christianity in the country. And here my takeaway that I wanted to let people think about is what I call the historical tightrope. Because a tightrope requires balance, and you can fall on either side. There's more than one way to go wrong on a tightrope. So I would say when we think about the questions around the revolution, we can go wrong in 2 ways. One is to say, well, what I might call the secular approach to the history, which is to say Christianity wasn't very important. It wasn't very important to the people. The ideas weren't very important. We can just set that aside. And I would say, no, that's a wrong interpretation. But we can also go wrong if we try to baptize everything and say, oh, everybody was a Christian. We'd be really happy worshiping with everybody, and it was just only a Christian revolution. And the historian in me says, no, we need to balance that out and be very careful, because Christianity was important, but it was important maybe in different ways for different people and at different degrees for different people. So we want to think through that and have that kind of temper what we should expect. My second point would be a reminder of the need for character. And in the revolutionary period, people talked about this in terms of virtue. And it's all over the writings about virtue in the new nation. It even shows up in George Washington's farewell address, which is a wonderful essay that everyone should commit to heart. Founders were not perfect. They had flaws. I, as a historian, I hope I could enumerate a lot of them, but they realized that virtue was important. It was important for political leaders. They said, you need virtue if you're going to have a political role, but it's also necessary for citizens. So the call for virtue should be both elected officials and who we are, that we should be practicing character in our own lives. And then just a third point, definitely we see people being politically involved. I think that's part of American civic engagement. We should encourage that. We shouldn't give up on that. But at the same time, as I looked at the Federalist Party, I think they had, maybe by not so much their choice, but by necessity, they realized that there were other ways to invest in the country as well beyond politics, that they really built up a number of cultural institutions. They were some of the best publishers in the country. They wrote the most magazines, they wrote the most books. So they were involved that way. They formed civic organizations, and they said this can serve the country. And they created religious organizations like the American Bible Society to spread Christian influence all the way across the country. And this wasn't political. So I guess one kind of advice that some of them might give is that there are ways to have impact and benefit that aren't political and that are in fact pre or before political. So I think they'd say we want to do both, right? We can be both political and cultural simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good point. We can put our faith in government to solve the world's problems or even the church's problems, but that's not its role. It has an important role, and
right.
The citizens should be involved for good, but we can't put all our eggs in that basket, so to speak, because there's a lot more that's going on. So thank you. Very good point.
That's exactly right.
We had another question. Tricia says, how as a parent do I discuss and defend my position teaching history from a Christian perspective to those who say that I am not teaching my child the, quote, true history? You have any thoughts about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend. I'd probably want to figure out what those critics were asking about true history or the real story. What I would say is the best way to do it is to take in the fullness of the past, right? We want to do it accurately, and part of that is to start with saying, no, there are definite influences that the church has had in many good ways, occasionally some not so good ways over the past 2,000 years. So if teaching Christianly is simply pointing those things out, that's a great start that many people don't have at all. But then, of course, there's the next step, which is we all approach the past from a certain perspective. That is, I would say, no matter where people are standing, a faith-informed perspective. And so it matters what we believe about God, his working in the world, human beings, that how we talk about that is going to shape what we talk about the past. And that's going to be true for everyone. So there, I guess I would just say, let's, by being honest about it, we're saying this is where we're coming from. Let's go into this, and then let's hold up the primary sources and see where those sources lead. And I think if you do that, that shows that there's a lot of thought, and a Christian historical perspective is a really defensible one to hold.
Mm-hmm. One thing we try to do in our curriculum is to be honest about the past, the good and the bad. You know, it can't be easy to focus on what we don't like about other people and kind of sweep under the rug the things, you know, that our tribe or our group has done, or our country. But we need to be honest about it so we can really confront it and acknowledge it, not so that we dwell in the past and, you know, are always beating ourselves up. You know, the stuff that happened in the past, those of us alive today are not responsible for that. But we do need to be honest about the consequences and the repercussions, and what we can do to work together, as you were saying, to try to build a healthy society, whatever form that takes, whether it's through government or through the church or just community groups. So being honest about the past is an important first step. It's not the last step, but it's a first step.
I think that's an excellent point. And who should be most concerned about telling the truth? But Christians, right? That if we believe in both small t truth and capital T truth, then we should want to tell the truth about the past. And then that opens up, I think, an even broader perspective on history.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas to encourage parents? Maybe their children are in high school and they're thinking about what comes next, college. It might be at a public university or maybe a private Christian university. So just any thoughts you've had from your experience on how parents can equip their children for what comes after high school?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to give the shameless plug. So as a professor of history at Samford University in Birmingham, I think we're doing a lot well. And so if there's anyone on this call or who hears this podcast who is interested in studying history at the collegiate level, I would love for them to be in touch. I'd love to talk to them about Samford and about our history program. So I just think it's great. And so would love to talk about that. But as people think about this, I guess I'd put it in two ways. First of all, the skills that can be developed, even in high school, that are transferable for future study would be things like reading broadly, right? That if you really care about what you're reading and you're able to analyze what you're reading, that's going to put you far ahead of a lot of people to begin with. So simply developing these skills is great. Being able to read primary sources is terrific. Knowing that, having that basis will put students further ahead. And then being able to communicate well, whether that's through written assignments, maybe some research papers about historical topics, and being able to talk about them, maybe give a speech or an oral presentation that would also be terrific as well. So be developing the skills and asking critical questions of what you're going to encounter. The other thing I would say, as you both look at colleges maybe, or look at books to pick up and read, would be to ask some background questions, right? Not to, most materials are pretty, accurate on the details, but ask questions about the big motivations, right? Who is either teaching a class or writing a book, right? Who are these people that we'll be interacting with? What are their motivations? What's their approach to the big picture questions? And so I don't think it's always appropriate to come out and say, well, how would you define your worldview? But you can ask interesting worldview questions. So what's your view of humanity? How would you describe the human condition? What do you think about faith and its role in the world? How do you relate these other big picture topics? How would you talk about truth? All of these questions can get to an understanding of who is trying to advance an idea. And I think that will then give a grid for interpreting what things are coming at you.
Well, this has been wonderful. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and feedback. Do you have any final words of encouragement for parents as they're homeschooling and teaching history?
Well, no, just I'm grateful that they're doing it. If they're on this call, hopefully they're benefiting from this kind of Notgrass insight of combination, right? That we said information, imagination with the literature, and the deep grounding with the primary sources. So I would just say it's good, it's worth doing, and in the process, we're shaping citizens for the country and the next generation to live responsibly, faithfully, and well. So those are all good endeavors, and so I'm grateful for everyone who tuned in.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. We'll be glad to offer you encouragement, whether it's specifically about Notgrass history or just more general encouragement for homeschooling. Dr. Den Hartog, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. We wish you and your family all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you so much.
This has been Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast app, and please leave a rating and review so that we can reach more people with our episodes. If you want to learn about new homeschool resources and opportunities from Notgrass History, you can sign up for our email newsletter at exploringhistorypodcast.com. This program was produced by me, Titus Anderson. Thanks for listening.